really highly specialized in sexual addiction, compulsivity, problematic sexual behavior, and betrayal trauma. So that is kind of my area of focus. I run this webinar, this Q&A webinar on the site to kind of help information from Dr. Rob's Prodependence perspective. I'm helping him a little bit with that and helping him write workbooks and things that will further develop this concept. We're really excited about it, and I've actually used this concept for almost now a year at my own facility here, and it's gone very well. So hopefully I can impart some knowledge that will be useful. These are most helpful when we're able to interact and ask questions, and so I want to be sure that that invitation is there, that please interact and ask questions if you have them. There's not a wrong question that you can ask, and I'll do my best to answer it and give you information that will be helpful. If we don't have any questions, Scott's going to tell me when we do. I'm going to kind of do a little bit of maybe give out some information on a concept that I think will be important or is important for most loved ones or partners who are in relationship with somebody who's battling addiction. One of the things that happens is there becomes a injury in that relationship. We talked a little bit about this in previous webinars, but there becomes an attachment or relationship injury inside that relationship. So the relationship becomes really complicated and really difficult to navigate. However, for the partner or oftentimes family members as well, it can turn into PTSD or post-traumatic stress. It can interact, that feeling of betrayal and loss and fear that somebody is failing, that someone you love is failing and struggling, that it shows up like PTSD because who you are primarily, that person who you're attached to is now pulling away, and they're doing behaviors that are causing injury to themselves and to the relationship. So that's very destabilizing for the person trying to love them and to help them. Sometimes that's has in the past been really misunderstood or mistreated by therapists, because sometimes it looks a little bit nutty. It can feel nutty if you're a partner, feel like you don't know what's up, what's down. How I got from point A to point B today, I don't remember. My memory's affected. A lot of things get affected when this crisis happens in life. And I'm trying to hold, if I'm a partner or a family, I'm trying to hold on to somebody who's pulling away. And some of my efforts to help them can sometimes be extreme, because I'm literally trying to save and hold on to that person. So I want to talk a little bit today about relational trauma and that PTSD piece. We're going to kind of cycle through some of these concepts, so don't panic if you feel like, gosh, I don't know about A, B, and C. We'll come back around. You can also go and watch the previous webinars, and I would encourage you to do that. It will give you lots more information. So I want to talk a little bit about the importance, and especially, well, throughout all of your healing process, but particularly when the symptoms, the feelings of crisis and those trauma symptoms are really high. Trauma symptoms can range, there's so many different ones, but in PTSD, trauma can affect your sleep, it can affect your health, it can affect your thought processes, it can affect pretty much every area of your life. It can affect your memory, what you remember and how you remember, because the part of your brain that is overly active is the part that's just trying to survive, not the part that's thinking really deeply and, processing, on this higher level. We're just in like survival mode. So one of the important tools that you'll want to learn throughout this process, particularly if you can feel that in yourself a lot, is how to ground yourself. And by grounding, I mean how to kind of plant your feet on the ground and stabilize those emotions and those thoughts and feelings that feel like they're swirling around you and are trying to uproot and you feel uprooted, is what I often hear partners say. I just feel like I can't root myself. Like I was fine yesterday, and today I'm all over the place. So, some other trauma symptoms are very, very physical. A lot of people say, I feel dizzy, I feel nauseous, I feel irritable, I feel hostile, I feel like I want to rage. My body will sweat, my heart will race. I'll get headaches, I'll get all sorts of things, tunnel vision, I can't really see, or things get very blurry. So the physiological, the body responses are very much related to the psychological distress and emotional distress that this type of thing causes. So grounding is a technique, and if you have a therapist, I'm sure they can help you with this as well. One of the ways that we learn how to ground is to focus on what's around you, to be super aware, because when we're in trauma, particularly this type of trauma, we're thinking about the past, the future, what happened last week, what might happen next week. All these fears and anxieties are kind of rushing through the mind and the body. So figuring out how to literally look around and ground myself with things I see in my environment. Really ground myself with the here and now is another way to say that, like being really present in the here and now. There's things you can learn to develop. You can learn how to use mindfulness and meditation, kind of breathing techniques to help you ground. But for me, I have to really look around at my environment. Like, where am I right now? What color is the wall? Who's in the room? What's the date? What's the time? What do I have to do later today? So I really have to get into the here and now, because the past story and the future story are what's really destabilizing inside of me. And this feeling of being floating away can come and go. Some people feel like they're in it all the time to some degree. And some people feel like they just, certain activating events around them can trigger that floating away response. So it's good to have a few tools in your pocket that you can use to reground yourself the best you can, so you can make decisions about your day, about you can function the best you can at work and with your families. And most people have a lot of plates spinning, but when this type of crisis happens in life, it takes so much real estate, so much energy. It's hard sometimes to reground so I can focus on the rest of my life. There's two parts of the brain that are important. It's just a really important little piece of information to know, that are involved in this process of feeling trauma. And there's what I mentioned before, the survival brain. We call it the limbic brain. It's the part of our brain that we often hear the fight, flight, or freeze. It's the part that's involuntary. That's where trauma lives. It's also where emotions live and good things live, but also trauma lives there. Addiction lives there. So that's the part of the brain that's not really thinking. There's not higher thinking going on. I'm just trying to get through them. I'm just trying to survive. But then there's the frontal cortex, the part of we call that the executive brain, like right up here, that tells us to sit down, to maybe not say that out loud. It's the part that's governing, like it's our social cues, right? And it also will help. It's the part that's more rational. It's not just trying to survive, it's processing through and looking. What we want to do when we ground, when we can learn to ground effectively, sometimes we can move further into the executive brain so we can feel more able to cope. And so that's what we're doing with some of the tools that you're learning or that you'll want to learn, is to really recognize when I'm in that limbic or that survival brain and start working towards moving things into the frontal cortex, the executive, the thinking part of our brain. And that's not an easy process. And sometimes people stay in that part of that, that really activated, scared part of their brain for a while. So the tools will still help. Grounding is one. I have all sorts of apps on my phone. I like freebies, so I don't go for expensive apps, but they're just relaxation apps that help. When we start to breathe intentionally, we start to bring down that intensity. Our heart and our heart rate and our breath start to match again, which start to calm down some of the anxiety and fear and the activation of that part of the brain. So intentional breathing, meditation, relaxation, recognizing your surroundings, sometimes getting support, calling somebody that's there with you and initiating contact and interaction with somebody can be helpful. So it's just important to know that you'll feel crazy, you're not crazy. That's how trauma works. The beautiful thing is trauma can be managed, and it can be, a lot of that can be resolved, but it takes time. And so to be really gentle with yourself as you're maybe in that place, and recognize it's pretty typical to go in and out of trauma in this process of trying to figure out my relationship and what's going on and what I want and if it's going to be okay or not. So is there any questions, Scott? I don't want to keep rambling.
Well, there's one there, but I did want to add a couple things to what you said and clarify a little bit, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Brassard. I'm the Director of Content Development for Sex and Relationship Healing and Seeking Integrity. And I am at our treatment center today. Most of our staff is here today. We're having an open house for local clinicians. I have snuck upstairs to help Kim with her webinar. Tammy is much more social than I am, so she's downstairs actually greeting people. Kim mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. It doesn't mean that you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It means that you have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a very serious mental illness. We finally got a diagnosis from the guys coming back from Vietnam who were traumatized by, their buddy's head getting blown off right next to them. Wives of sex addicts and family members of addicts, they go through the same thing. People's heads aren't getting blown off, but the emotional trauma is that deep. When you're living with an addict, when you've been cheated on, it's incredibly painful. Steffens and Rennie, Barbara Steffens and I forget, Stephanie Rennie maybe, they did some research looking at women of male sex addicts. And they found that, I forget the exact percentage, but it was something like 80+% of those women displayed at least 2 or 3 post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, nightmares, dissociation, sweats, elevated heart rate, obsessing about the betrayal, things like that. And those symptoms stuck around for quite a while, and they're very disruptive. So partners and loved ones of addicts, particularly sex addicts, but any addict really, it is traumatic. And it puts you in crisis, and you're going to behave as if you're in crisis. You're going to feel like you're in crisis because you are, and that's normal. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. Fight, flight, freeze. You gave a great explanation of the brain. I always like to simplify it, particularly when I have newcomers in recovery because they can't think straight. So I call it the lizard brain. Mm-hmm. Which is my fight, flight, freeze, survival brain. Ooh, yummy, fly, yum, yum, yum. That's the extent of the lizard brain. Oh, tiger, I think I'll run. And then I call it the cat dog brain, which is the midbrain. I have a cat, and she's sweet, and she loves me, and I know she loves me, and she has emotions, and she has needs, but she cannot add 2 and 2 and come up with 4. Because we need the human brain, the outer brain, the executive functioning part of the brain for that. So there's 3 levels to the brain, and addiction lives in the lizard brain. I mean, it is a core thing. It's about survival. It's fear-based. It's, And Kim mentioned that, you know, when we're stuck in that, it helps to ground ourselves, and grounding will take us out of the lizard brain and through the cat and dog brain and get us into our human thinking brain, where we're somewhat rational, usually, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah, I have a friend who he can tell when I'm in my lizard brain, and he'll just look at me and say, "Scott, where are your feet?" And I look down and I see where my feet are, and I remember where I am, and it gets me into the moment. When I'm in my lizard brain, I'm either in the past or I'm in the future, or both at the same time. And you know, that doesn't work. I need to be in the moment. So yeah, I love grounding as a way to get out of the craziness.
I like the word grounding because it literally describes what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to grow roots. We're trying to ground, put our feet on the ground that feel uprooted frequently. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Sometimes I forget, like, as a clinician, sometimes we talk about this stuff every day, all the time, and I forget. Sometimes, like, my brain just goes away. It just starts running. So I need to hit the brakes. But yeah, I appreciate that explanation. And I love also love that, Scott, you mentioned that you're right. Not everybody has PTSD, but they have the symptoms. On occasion, it can cause PTSD, that actual, you know, disorder, because if it lasts super long, or I don't get intervention, and I have ongoing injury that doesn't get intervention, sometimes it can develop that way. But I think the biggest piece that's important to know is you're not crazy. That is not what this is. And I want to be gentle about this, but if any of you have ever been told by a therapist that you're crazy, or that you know, if you didn't just love him or her or them so much, or, you know, if you'd stop trying to fix them or whatever, that, you know, you'd get better, that was just bad advice.
Yeah, that's why we don't really like the codependence model, because it implies there's something wrong with you. And you know, what's wrong with you is you've been traumatized through no fault of your own, and you're in crisis, and you're behaving like a person in crisis, and that's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
It's not.
You're normal.
That's right. You don't need a diagnosis because you've got a broken heart, and because you feel sad and powerless to stop something that is just feels like it's going to destroy your family or your relationship. So, you know, most human beings would respond that way to that kind of loss. But getting the help to help reduce some of that and process it, that you need, and I will always plug for a qualified, experienced therapist specifically that works and has had specific training in betrayal trauma, and understands that. Or you may get somebody who will try and push the codependence onto you, which is, something that, this is why Prodependence came about. It came about because codependence does not work, and we just didn't have any, for the longest time, that's all everybody used. They just figured, well, there must be something wrong with the person who's in the relationship with this person. They must be doing something wrong, and that is not the case. Addiction stands on its own. It definitely has its reasons and its causes and its etiology, like we like to say, but it comes from somewhere, experiences or events, but it is not the other person's fault. No matter how crazy you might feel, how crazy you might actually get in trying to get better or trying to control those losses, or those feelings, that cannot be the partner's fault. It's just not possible. But it does drastically and dramatically affect the partner. And that's where the trauma comes from. There's a very simplistic grounding technique I'd like to share that maybe will be useful. I call it, I just call it, it's a grounding technique. I don't even have a name for it, but it's exactly what Scott was saying, how, what, where are my feet? Where are my hands? What color's my shirt? I'm getting in the here and now. This one is a sensory grounding. So a grounding for your senses, which will in effect do the same thing. And I like it because I can use my hand And I start with C. So I name 5 things that I can see around me: a lamp, a computer, a chair, to 5. And then I go to 4 things I can feel. And that would be, it's a little hot in here. There's no breeze. You could even go to feelings if that's, 4 things I feel. But I would do more sensory because that brings you into the here and now. 3 things that I can hear: my air conditioner's buzzing and my voice is rattling on, whatever. But 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and then 1 thing that I can taste. And that might be nothing, but you're at least considering what's going on with you physically. Grounding the body is what the point is, because the body's the one that's holding all the tension and the stress and the fear. So grounding the body is, we want to go, that's why the senses work. So, and you can put those in any order. It doesn't have to be the order I just named. It could be 5 things I see, 4 things I taste. It could be whatever. But the idea is, for me, I can literally visualize my hand or a hand, and I'm checking them off. So it's just a little, preview maybe or something that you can use and take away from today for grounding. But like I said, there's lots of ways to do that. I think exercise is a huge grounding thing to do, because you're using your body. And sometimes certain exercises like a yoga or some of those that do breathing, mindful breathing, can also have the effect of helping, bring down the anxiety, because they're getting your breath and your heart in sync. So exercise can be really good for that too, to help with the grounding. You have any other ideas on grounding things, Scott?
Yeah, we've got a question too, so I'll talk about one grounding thing, and then we'll go ahead and take the question. I use breath work, and this is something that I actually learned in a webinar that I was doing with David Fawcett, and he suggested it to somebody, so I tried it, and I was like, oh my God, that works really well. Breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. And do that at least 3 times, and you'll lower your blood pressure, you'll lower your heart rate, for me, I have anxiety, so it works for me, and I do that. I had to go to the doctor's office the other day. I hate doing that. My blood pressure is always high because I hate to be at the doctor's office. I take it at home, it's not high. So I did breath work, and it was one of the first times my blood pressure reading at the doctor's office was fine. Amazing, it really works. Traffic on the way home tonight. I'm driving home from LA to Palm Springs. It's Friday night. It's going to be a nightmare. I will be doing breath work in the car.
Well, the coolest thing about breath work is you can do it in real time. You don't necessarily have to have a special place and a special. I do something similar. I call it box breathing. I just do 4-4, and it looks like a box. I think I mentioned this in one of my previous webinars, but I breathe in for 4, I hold it for 4, I breathe out for 4, and hold it for 4. It's a visualization in my head that makes it easy for me. But similarly, it will bring down those anxious symptoms. So thank you.
Yeah, the breathing itself does something, and for me, the counting, it takes me out of whatever insanity I was in. Okay, so we've got a question here. My partner, who has been in recovery for a few years, started reading Out of the Doghouse. He stopped. He said it made him feel really bad, and it also triggered him, so he doesn't want to read it anymore. I'm at a loss. I love this question because I worked on that book with Dr. Rob. Yeah, and it's a tough book for a cheating man to read. Thoughts, Kim?
I would love to hear what you have to say as well. I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, facing your demons, so to speak, and having to face the realities of what the addiction has done to the relationship is painful for an addict. Remember, that's why he or she probably went into addiction in the first place, is to avoid conflict, because I don't know how to deal with shame or uncomfortable feelings. So reading that book doesn't pull any punches about, what someone would need to do to rebuild trust in the relationship, and how important it is for the addict to recognize the damage that they've done to their partner as they've acted outside of the marriage. So my thoughts are precisely that. I always say resistance is usually a place we want to make friends with. So we want to make friends with resistance, and that's his journey, meaning you can't force that, with him or control that, but you could certainly invite him to push through that, or that maybe let him know how you feel, how important that is for you, that he, push through, even if it makes him feel bad. And I hope he's getting support while he's reading it. Maybe he hopefully has a group or a therapist or both, or people he can talk to that can help bring down his shame by relating to how he's feeling. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was going to say empathy. I'm sure probably when you found out about his cheating, I'm assuming that you're female and he's male, so if I'm wrong, I apologize. But probably when you found out about his cheating, you started to internalize blame for what he did. If I was a better wife, or gave better sex at home, or the right type of sex, or more sex, or dressed differently, or hadn't gained 10 pounds, or was a better cook, or who knows what, then he wouldn't have done this. If I was different, more, better enough, he wouldn't have done this. And first of all, that's just not true. When men cheat, when women cheat, and I'm a sex addict, I'm in recovery for sex addiction, it had nothing to do with the people around me. It was me having uncomfortable emotions that I did not want to feel, and I was engaging in an intensely distracting behavior, an emotionally intense behavior, or taking a substance that triggered the same neurochemical reaction in my brain. And it took me away from the stress and the emotional discomfort that I was feeling. It had nothing to do with anybody I was dating at the time, or my job, or anything. I could not deal with emotions because I never learned how to do it. I had an interesting childhood, we'll leave it at that. And I never really learned how to deal with emotions.
Right.
So I did my thing, and it hurt other people, but I did my thing anyway. And I get it where your partner is trying to read out of the doghouse. I found it early in my recovery very difficult. At that time, Rob's book, Sex Addiction 101, wasn't out, so I was reading Pat Carnes' Out of the Shadows. And I found it very difficult to read that book because, it was pointing at me, and it was digging up my crummy stuff. And I'll tell you a story about Out of the Doghouse. We sent it to a reviewer in New York. I forget which paper, and he actually called Rob and said, "I hated reading this book." And Rob's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And the guy said, it's so good. It's like you crawled in my head and scooped it out and flopped it on the page. And I was like, "Oh, well, then we did our job. That's what we wanted to do." It's supposed to be hard for him to read. But I would encourage him to go back and take it in little bits and pieces. If he can only read a page at a time, so be it. Just process one little thing every day, or 3 times a week, or whatever, and he'll get through it, because there's a lot of great info in that book.
I would say thank you so much for that. I would say too, as a partner, if you feel like you could certainly validate his feelings. You could let him know, "I can only imagine. I'm sure it's difficult. The cool part is you're feeling." We can only heal where our emotions are. And for addicts, it's very frightening. So to go there, if I've always taken them away, or used something to stop them from happening. So reading that and feeling sad, mad, scared, whatever those emotions are, shame is what I'm hearing.
Shame.
Shame. We can only heal what we can feel. And so, I agree with Scott. Take it in small doses. Ground yourself. be a great thing for him to do as well. But ground yourself, get some support, get right back at it. The power leaves as we confront it, as we keep confronting it over time. The power and the intensity and the shame around our behaviors and maybe the things that we've done start to go away as we bravely confront them. So it's hard as a partner probably to watch that and to watch him. The thing you need him to do is to learn and read and change. And so now he's trying to do that, and he's getting triggered and, going back to his, maybe, letting fear overtake him. But I would just keep inviting. Don't lose hope. I mean, he started to read it. Hopefully he'll keep at it. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, the follow-up to that is he says that all he hears as he reads this book is, "You're a cheater, you're a cheater, you're a cheater," which makes him feel bad, and he doesn't find it helpful. And that's kind of shame tapes. Kim, can you talk a little bit about the difference between guilt and shame, and which one is helpful and which one is not, and what they each look like? I think that might be helpful.
Absolutely.
In terms of
this question for sure, and this issue. I just wanted to mention in the chat, they said, Scott, that your sound's dropping in and out. You notice that?
Well, I don't notice it because I can hear my own self talking, but
okay.
I apologize if it is. I'm not in my usual place, and the internet may be spotty here. Sorry.
I didn't know if you saw it.
Yeah, okay. I did.
So the difference between shame and guilt, there's so much great information out there right now about shame. I would send you and him to anything Brene Brown and read it, digest it, go to Netflix. She has a great Netflix special that was released a couple of months ago that on shame. The difference between guilt and shame, sometimes this is really hard to piece out because it all blends in together when you're kind of, when you're in addiction or when you're in a bad place. So guilt is kind of that normal, sometimes we call it healthy shame. I've heard it referred to as healthy shame, but guilt is that sense of conscience. It's the understanding that we have made a mistake. When we feel guilty, it motivates us to make amends, to say I'm sorry, to change, to acknowledge my wrongdoing, and that kind of thing. Conversely, when we feel shame, I always say it's like guilt on steroids. It's not just feeling bad and feeling my conscience. I internalize that guilt and I make it about me in a way that's super unhealthy. So it's always helpful when I can give you both messages. Where guilt might say, I did a bad thing, I did something bad. Shame would come in and say, I'm a bad person. Guilt would say, I made a mistake. Shame would say, I'm a mistake. So it's more internalized. And one of the biggest things to note about the two, with guilt, there's the possibility of change and healing and movement. With shame, it feels like I'm intrinsically broken. There's no hope for me. There's all sorts of ugly messages. Maybe the fact that your husband's seeing cheater, 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 cheater just shows me that he's internalizing that in a shameful way. And so whatever that is for him, I'm a bad person, I'm not, I'll never get better. Whatever's going on for him, it's shame for sure. It's not motivating him to keep going with the book and reading and learning, so acknowledging where shame shows up in everyone's life, because we all have it. There's nobody that's free from shame. The addicts have sometimes a very disproportional amount of shame, especially when they're in the addiction. It doesn't make everything okay. It just helps to understand why things get colored with kind of the shame paintbrush, I like to, or uses that lens, and I see everything through a shame lens, through I'm a terrible person lens. And I don't want to be reminded of that because I've got so much of that already going on in me. So like I said, any of Brene Brown's work, the original shame guy was John Bradshaw. His work is still very valid. In most of his work, I think, is still really valid, and probably where Brene jumped off a lot of her work, but all about how shame impacts us and where it shows up and sabotages our ability to heal, to have healthy interpersonal relationships that are healthy. So hopefully
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Bradshaw's language was shame and toxic shame. And Brene came along and changed shame to guilt, which is really what it is, and toxic shame to just shame. I think her language is a little clearer for me. I always like to use that. Guilt for me means I did something that I feel badly about, that I wish I hadn't done, and I need to change my behavior in the future. And here's how I'm going to do it. It's positive motivation for change. Shame is, I'm a horrible person. There's nothing I can do about it. So I might as well just go off the deep end. Shame is quicksand. If we step in shame, it's just going to suck us down in there until we drown. Guilt is a positive emotion. It's not fun to have, but it's a positive emotion. Shame is really, really difficult. And somebody who has cheated on someone that he loves is going to feel shame. He really ought to be feeling guilt. It would be more productive if he was feeling guilt, but he's clearly feeling shame. And he probably has some shame tapes from childhood that are cropping up that tell him he's a horrible person. And this book, even though it's not meant it's meant to trigger guilt, not shame, but if you're a shame-based person, it's going to trigger shame. So I really feel for him. I would encourage him to, I don't know if he has an individual therapist, but if he does, that therapist may be able to help him work through the shame he's feeling about what he's done, and the way that particular book brings it up for him, because it's clearly very painful.
Right. And shame also, one of the most painful things about shame in a relationship is, you would think shame, if somebody feeling shame would bring you closer, but it actually further isolates the person. This is what makes the addiction keep going, because I am so afraid that if I say something, I'm going to be rejected forever. I'm going to lose, that I'm going to be found out that I really am this terrible person, because I really feel unlovable anyway. So shame really injures. I always say shame turns people into me monsters in the most interesting way, because everything becomes about me, in the way that meaning somebody says something and I color it with shame and it's all about me. And my wife confronts me about a boundary or something or my husband, whoever confronts me about something that they need, and I color it with, oh, well, I'm bad anyway. It's kind of that martyr syndrome. I can never wrap my hands around that and have a productive conversation where we can make changes when when both of us or one of us are in shame. So shame is a fundamental part of healing for both the partner, family members, and addict, that will want to be really focused on throughout the healing and recovery process. So the best place to go is to start with Brene. You can do that on your own. At least it will give you some foundational understanding. There's some great videos on YouTube she's put out. You can got great books and audios and audibles, and so that's where I would start there with the shame.
Yeah, the Netflix video that she does on shame is incredible. One of the things Brene says is, shame, we're not born with shame. We learn shame from other people, so that we need to heal shame with other people. So one of the options for him, I don't know if he's in 12-step recovery group for sex addiction or if he's in a support group for men who've cheated. But I think that would help with his shame, to be around other men who are in the same boat, so to speak. It was certainly helpful for me early on, because I was drowning in shame when I got into recovery, and I needed group therapy and I needed 12-step recovery, both, to help me work through that, little bits at a time. It took a while.
That is so true, because you really need shame reflected back to you. You've got to have people who aren't as connected to you, maybe as your partner, or that can really, you can see it through yourself through other people's eyes. This is why 12-step groups and support groups work, because it reduces shame by putting myself in a place where other people have similar struggles, and I still feel loved and accepted when I thought there was no way I could ever tell anybody any of this, and feel like I could function. They start reducing shame by coming out of this dark place that they've been in. But that's all good and great for the addict, but it's a hard place for a partner to wait for the reduction of that shame. Because my guess is you just want to say, read the damn book and right, get over it, because and so I just want to validate that feeling, if that may be what you may be feeling. Yeah, it is super difficult and painful to be patient through that process, because the addiction's already selfish and self-centered and self-serving, and so you've probably felt alone through that process, and now I feel alone because he's trying to get help for the addiction. Now he's in all sorts of shame about it. I still feel like he's not, or she's not available to me, and that's just another kind of painful thing for the partner. But if they do their work and they're in with the right person, with the right help, a trained person that knows how to help with addiction, shame will be a big piece of what they work through.
Yeah. And I think Kim touched it. You're probably mad as hell. He cheated. He's not reading the book that he should be reading, and you have every right to be mad as hell. But and what you want from him is some empathy for the pain you're feeling, because he broke your heart. He cheated on you. You trusted him, and he stabbed you in the back. This is the one person who is supposed to always be on your side, and he did this. And you need some empathy. You need him to understand what you're feeling, and he's not there yet. He's not able to do that yet because he's struggling with what he's feeling, and needs empathy from you. It's a real catch-22 of early recovery. Is both parties need the other party, and neither party's quite ready to give or receive.
Absolutely. I love too, in Prodependence, Rob kind of, in the book, his Prodependence book, he kind of articulated this dilemma so well when he says, you have to learn, if you're a partner or loved one, you have to figure out how to love and hate at the same time. Because I think most people have that dichotomy. Like they're like, I'm so mad at you and I love you, and I don't know how to hold both of those spaces. I just guess I want to validate that that's normal. Yeah. To feel any of that emotion, and to vacillate between anger and sadness and hurt and loss and confusion. It doesn't feel good, but that is, it does happen. And yeah, you want him to show up, and now it's just another way that but I feel like hopefully, like I said, he's got a good therapist that he can rely on there. But keep at it. Keep at your own work and taking care of yourself, and being gentle with yourself. You can always tell him how you feel, and he won't like it. It might bring up shame, but that's not about you. If your intention is to just express yourself and say how it is you're feeling. That's something we just got to learn how to do. We have to learn how to resolve conflict and have difficult conversations. And addicts typically haven't been doing that because they've been running to whatever they've been using to take away the emotion. But that doesn't mean that stating your truth and your feelings is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, and from the addict's perspective, I can tell you that hearing another person's truth and feelings is incredibly difficult. Because I'm not even willing to feel my own right now, and here you're giving me yours. Oh God, this is, but you can say, you might think you're a monster. I don't. I still love you. If I thought you were a monster and still didn't love you, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you. One of the things I tell my sponsees is, when their wife comes to them. My sponsees are all male, with her feelings and her truth, that means she still loves them. It may not sound like it, but if she didn't still love them, she wouldn't be talking to them. And that seems to help them. So maybe you could explain to him, I don't know, we're just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks here a little bit, but, let him know you're not about, I still love you. And I see the guy I married in there, not the guy this monster that you seem to think you are. But you need to do the work. And it bugs me when you're not doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah, it bugs me. It hurts me. It makes me afraid. I'm not certain what to hold on to. I want to believe. It's difficult to believe, whatever those feelings are. But also, I just can't reiterate it enough to take care of you. Do whatever you need to take care of you. This is a difficult, this to me, I always say learning that there's an addiction and that there's hope and there's healing and there's things we can do. It's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just my metaphor that works, but it reminds me of like a wash cycle, like we're filling the bucket. We're like, oh, this is nice. And then the real work starts, and it feels like the agitator cycle for a long time. It's like, I don't want to get out, but I don't want to stay in. And it's just this constant push and pull. And for most couples, one way or the other, that agitator cycle will end. Hopefully the addict will get it and figure out how to stand in that space and, have those conversations and support himself and understand his shame and all that, or it won't. But, you're never stuck. There's decisions that you can always make, as painful as they may be. But it takes a lot of courage to wade through this water in this phase. It really does. So thank you for your question.
Kim, can you give the listeners some hope about what a relationship can look like after going through all of this pain and, 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back? Because in my experience, a lot of relationships end up stronger than they were before the betrayal. And I wonder if you see that too.
Boy, I sure do. And not only that, I just feel like I get this unbelievable window. I think I have such a sacred experience when I work with people in these spaces, because it's like, how are we going to wind our way out of this? But I see relationships, definitely they're stronger in the way that I'm sure every relationship wished that wouldn't have happened in order to get here, right? We're never going to be like, oh yay, I wanted to go through betrayal in order to get here. But what happens is their relationship becomes much more intentional. They're much more, they learn what they need individually and as a couple, and they're able to communicate and hold space for each other and have tough conversations. They're able to ask the hard questions. I think for partners, they're able to trust that voice, that gut instinct that something doesn't feel right. And you probably along this journey will figure out, oh, I was right. I had a feeling about that. As he becomes more, or she becomes more and more honest and transparent, that validation will come. But I've been doing this a long time, and I have couples that I see that have been living recovery and been post affair, post addiction for 15, 20 years. And they are doing wonderfully. The smart couples know brakes will squeak sometimes. So every now and then I got to go back, and, back to my therapist, back to recovery is not something, and healing's not something we just go, oh, that was then and this is now. Keeping that balance in life and checking in and staying honest is an ongoing. So it's a living, breathing thing. But those couples are remarkable to me. And I always say this would be the worst job ever. I would have quit long ago if I didn't see people get better, because it really would be so difficult. But I do. I see individuals and couples get better. Sometimes the marriage works and sometimes it doesn't, for a variety of reasons. But individuals heal if they want it, and they work for it. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah, I see the same thing in recovery, and it's exactly what Kim talked about. It sucks that I needed, flashing lights and handcuffs to get me to do something about my life. But I'm so, I do a gratitude list every day, and that's often on the gratitude list, because I was not going to make changes until it really went to shit. And I had no choice. And you know, now 20 years later, my life is so much better than it was before. I mean, my life, I'm happier now than I've been at any point in my life, including early childhood, which was actually pretty good in my house. You know, it was later childhood that got weird, but so I'm grateful, and I see that with people with relationships. They're glad they went through it because they have more honesty, more trust, more intimacy than they had before, because the process makes you do that.
Absolutely. And oftentimes people don't get modeled healthy relationships. That's often why they find themselves where they are. You know, they don't know what healthy, you know, intimate connection looks like, or they never had healthy attachments maybe modeled for them. So the cool part is you live life kind of in full color. Like, you know, we're looking at all the color, and it can be pretty intense sometimes, but, you know, as addicts do their work and are able to start, because remember, that's the other thing. If I'm not feeling, I'm taking that feeling away, then I'm not growing emotionally. They often say, there's a little controversy about this, but I think it rings true in what I've experienced. Wherever addiction sort of starts in life, emotional growth is stunted. Meaning, if I started my addiction at 15, I started really, let's say sex addiction, I started really looking a lot of pornography and masturbating or whatever it is that I'm doing to take away whatever emotions I'm feeling. I have to feel emotions to grow my emotional self. It's like it's like weights. I have to lift weights to grow my muscles, you know, like I have to do the work. So if I stop feeling, I stop growing. So this is why you may have a very successful, dynamic spouse that is awesome until he or she is in the addict. And then it feels like you're parenting. It feels like you've got this defensive adolescent, you know, and it's not because, and that's not, again, an excuse. It's just an explanation as to when they start to grow up and feel their emotions and not act out, they start to become an emotional grown-up. And emotional grown-ups can handle a marriage. Adolescents can't handle marriage very well on an emotional level or other level. So that's what we're waiting for, is that growing up process to happen. And it just doesn't happen overnight. So awesome.
Thank you, Kim. We're out of time. I see some people logging in now. We had a little time change issue, and I will apologize. We did not get our website fully updated. I promise it will be by next week. But for those of you who just logged in late, I did record this. I'll get it up on YouTube. I'll try and get it up tomorrow, even though it's Saturday. So please log onto our YouTube channel or the old webinars on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, because this was a really good session.
And if you guys, those of you who just logged on, really what happened is time zoned. I'm in Arizona, and California is where the website gets changed anyway. So Arizona doesn't change time, but everyone around us does. So for a lot of you, my 3 o'clock is your 4 o'clock. And so we apologize for that confusion. It'll always be 3 o'clock Arizona time. So just remember that. So if you're in Pacific, it's going to be 4 o'clock if you're the other way. So you have to calibrate that. The iPhone will tell you Arizona time. I can find out the times in the world.
So Kim's time zone didn't change. The rest of us did. So I apologize to anybody who got screwed up. And I promise, Tammy and I will get the website fixed so it gives the right times.
And if you guys have questions that we didn't get to, they're so important, and I would like to do that. Please bring them back with you in 2 weeks. Don't wait for me, of course. If you need help, get help. Go to a drop-in group or any of the other webinars that are appropriate and ask those questions. I'm certainly one of a million great experts here, but get that need met. But come back and we'll keep chatting. So good luck, you guys. Hang in there. Yeah. Hang in there and take good care of yourselves. And I'll see you in 2.
Thanks, Kim. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.